Nothing Putin is doing right now is actually new. This is just a stale mothball-scented plagiarism. There is no strategic genius here, and certainly no multi-move masterstroke. Prolonged negotiations to buy time and terrorizing the innocent civilian population. All of this has happened before in Russian history and concluded with disastrous results. While we try to gaze forward into the mysteries of tomorrow, in Moscow offices they are meticulously working to restore the day before yesterday, using outdated manuals and ancient instructions from the era of the plague and sailing frigates. Remember, Sergei Lavrov once came out with some nonsense, saying that in his work, President Putin consults exclusively with Peter the Great, Ivan the Terrible, and Catherine II. So, as it turns out, this actually is not a joke at all. For Ukrainians, who since 2022 have been asking themselves every winter why they strike at the energy sector if it does not bring them victory on the front lines, it is important to understand that we are dealing with a fanatical reenactor. What Vladimir Putin is doing today is practically a word-for-word, down to the very comma, retelling of the chapter The Northern War about Peter the Great from Vladimir Medinsky's historical textbook. Putin has seemingly decided that he had found in Russian history a magical manual on how to burn out the enemy's will and achieve a final victory. But there is one nuance here. This model of greatness through exhaustion, which he is so diligently copying, was not a guarantee of success, but a sentence with a deferred execution date. During the Great Northern War, Peter the Great transformed Muscovy into a colossus with feet of clay, which was only able to sustain itself under conditions of total archaism. But Putin is trying to force this monster into our world, where all of that fragile clay inevitably crumbles at the very first encounter with reality. To understand why Putin's bloody plagiarism is sputtering before our eyes, let's dissect the mechanism itself. How exactly did the vast and powerful empire of that time orchestrate its strategic victories through the deceptive imitation of peace? And why does a scenario originally written for sailing frigates and flintlock rifles guarantee modern Russia not a triumph, but a final and absolute historical shipwreck today? But first, subscribe to this channel and click the bell to get notifications about new videos. Please remember to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. This really helps to promote the video. And if you want to support the creator, check out Patreon and buy me a coffee. All the links are in the description and the first comment. If you want to understand why the Kremlin so obsessively pushes the idea of being ready for dialogue through all its agents of influence, don't look for any peaceful intentions here. This is the famous Åland Loop, a tactical naval maneuver first tested by Peter the Great against the Swedes over 300 years ago. In the year 1718, when the Great Northern War had finally reached a long and bloody stalemate, an endless diplomatic marathon began on the remote Åland Islands. Peter the Great provided his trusted envoys Osterman and Bruce with specific instructions that today serve as a desk manual in Putin's bunker. Drag out the negotiations for as long as possible, but under no circumstances should you break them off. So, what exactly is the deep cynicism behind this scheme? For the Empire, the process of diplomatic negotiations is not a viable pathway toward lasting peace, but rather a calculated form of waging war. Pay close attention to Putin's current rhetoric. He persistently calls for dialogue, but he categorically refuses to consider a truce or a ceasefire during the meetings. This is a literal copy of the historical three-point strategic method used by Peter the Great. The first point is the imitation of adequacy. While diplomats are drinking tea, the aggressor appears to the world as a party seeking a solution. The second point is paralysis of will. An endless process creates the illusion among allies that an agreement is just around the corner, which means they can hold back on supplying weapons or the next package of sanctions. The third point is betting on fatigue. Peter patiently waited for the Swedish Riksdag to clash with the king and for Britain to gradually lose its interest in the Baltic. Similarly, Putin is waiting for elections in the West, discord in Kiev, and the specific moment when the world simply becomes completely accustomed to the war as background noise. For the reenactors in the Kremlin, negotiations are not an attempt to reach an agreement, but rather a shot of valerian for the opponent. He suggests talking while the missiles are still flying, counting on the very process of dialogue to soften the resolve of Ukraine and the West faster than his army can on the battlefield. Peter the Great bided his time on the Åland Islands, pretending to be ready for compromise while simultaneously preparing his most treacherous blow. He knew that in order to get his negotiating partner to sign the necessary papers more quickly, it wasn't about persuasion. It was about pushing them to the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe. And here, the talentless plagiarist Putin moves forward into the next chapter of his well-worn and old playbook. For those looking for military logic in the strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, there simply isn't any. Putin is literally copying the raids of General Lacy, who, 300 years ago, forced his enemy to become more compliant not by fighting their army, but by waging war against women, children, and the elderly. In 1719, when the diplomatic negotiations on the Åland Islands reached a complete deadlock, Peter I decided that the Swedish people should pay dearly for the stubbornness of their king. He sent a massive landing force to the Swedish coast with a single brutal task: to turn the daily lives of the civilian population into a state of constant torture. Lacy did not storm large fortresses or seek out open battles. Instead, he burned copper factories, grain warehouses, and residential houses, methodically destroying the essential logistical infrastructure that allowed the people to survive. While the entire Swedish coastline was slowly turning into smoldering ashes, the diplomat Osterman would approach the Swedish government with a mockingly polite and cold question. "Well, my dear gentlemen, has your official position changed at all now? Do our terms not seem significantly more reasonable to you in the harsh light of these fires?" This is the essence of Putin's formula. Missile and drone strikes on the critical energy infrastructure are the modern-day Lassie landing, while Lavrov and the other Kremlin talking heads are the collective Osterman, patiently waiting for Ukraine's nerves to finally break from the biting cold and darkness. In the mind of the reenactor, the immense suffering of millions of innocent people is just a simple button to press in order to force a signature on the final capitulation. He deliberately sets his neighbor's house on fire so that, while choking on the thick smoke, the neighbor will run out to him with a signed deed of gift. But it's precisely at this point that the underachiever Putin makes his main miscalculation. He learned how to strike a match, but completely ignored the ending of the chapter. The significant error of the Kremlin reenactor is that he mistakenly conflated the form with the actual substance. Putin is convinced if he precisely repeats Peter the Great's moves, drags out time, and strikes at the rear, then the Treaty of Nystad and greatness will automatically follow. But he stubbornly and persistently fails to see the fundamental difference in how that time is actually being spent. Peter I deliberately extended the duration of the war in order to build. While diplomats argued for years on the Åland Islands, the empire was feverishly importing Western technologies, constructing new manufactories, and creating a navy from the ground up, however modest it may have been. For Peter, time was a vital resource for national modernization. For Putin, however, time has become a resource that leads only to decay. While he waits for the West to eventually grow weary and lose their resolve, his own technological base is not being renewed, but is instead degrading to the level of Iranian drones and North Korean shells. Peter the Great stole the future from Europe in order to win. Putin is recklessly squandering what remains of the Soviet past, hoping that the world will simply grow tired of standing by and watching this drawn-out suicide. The second systemic miscalculation is the scale of the coalition. Peter fought against Sweden, which by the end of the war was left in complete isolation, having lost its allies and resources. Putin, on the other hand, is trying to wait out a victory in a confrontation with a coalition whose combined resources and technological potential exceed Russia's by dozens of times. You simply cannot systematically wear down the world using a strategic playbook from the bygone era of sailing frigates when your modern opponent relies on satellite reconnaissance and an interconnected global financial system. In the 18th century, the war of attrition tactic worked because the world was slow and archaic. Today, trying to revive this algorithm leads not to the expansion of national borders, but to the inevitable and systemic collapse of Russia itself. Putin became so absorbed in playing the role of Peter the Great that he missed the main lesson of history. An empire that places its bets on wearing down its enemy, while having drained financial resources and significant technological weaknesses, will always exhaust itself first. This bloody act of plagiarism will reach its final end, not with a triumph on the Neva, but with the dismantling of the system that has mistakenly decided the shadows of the dead are the best advisors in the world of the living. Putin has never truly understood. In history, you cannot simply copy and paste someone else's victory. If you do not comprehend the immense cost involved, Peter I bequeathed to his successors an empire drained and wrung dry, which for another century trembled uncontrollably from poverty and palace coups. Vladimir Putin does not have that substantial margin of safety nor those 100 years to recover. His clumsy and poorly executed plagiarism is not a path to greatness, but a reckless and rapid acceleration through history straight to the finale, where instead of a triumphant Treaty of Nystad, he will find only a heavy and suffocatingly oppressive silence over the ruins of a system he himself has systematically dismantled and erased. The chapter will end, and there will be